Book name: The Unsaid Goodbye, written and published by Dr. Prashant. Overview of The Unsaid Goodbye. The Unsaid Goodbye is a heartfelt journey through the complexities of love, loss, and the moments that linger in the spaces between words. The story follows two individuals who find themselves connected through shared experiences and deep emotions, but due to circumstances beyond their control, they never truly say goodbye. As time passes, their lives take different paths, but the memories of their bond continue to shape their decisions, actions, and hopes. This novel explores the tension between holding on to the past and embracing the future, as well as the unspoken emotions that often hold the most meaning. Chapter 1. The Beginning of Us. The story of Sarah and Michael begins at a time in their lives when they were both seeking something new, though neither fully realized it. Sarah had recently moved to the city to start her first job after graduating from college. Excited yet apprehensive about the future, she arrived with a mix of hope and uncertainty. The city felt vast, and despite its energy, Sarah often felt isolated in the crowd. She had left behind a small town where she'd grown up, and while the city represented a fresh start, she couldn't help but feel a longing for the comfort of familiarity. She settled into her new role at a marketing firm, eager to prove herself, but unsure of how to fit into the corporate world. She spent the first few weeks trying to find her rhythm, learning the ropes of her job while adjusting to the city's fast pace. But even as she immersed herself in her work, something inside her remained unsettled. She missed the quiet evenings with her family, the leisurely walks in the park, and the ease of relationships that had been formed over years. The noise of the city overwhelmed her, and the idea of forging new connections seemed like an uphill battle. Then came Michael. He was a colleague, someone who was easy to overlook at first glance. Tall, with quiet eyes, he didn't seem to draw attention in the crowded office, but there was something about him that intrigued Sarah. Michael had been with the company for a few years and was known for his steady, calm presence. He didn't speak much in meetings, but when he did, his words were measured, thoughtful. People respected him, but few truly knew him. Sarah, however, noticed him right away. He had a way of carrying himself with a subtle confidence that didn't scream for attention. He seemed, in some ways, just like her, a little out of place, a little too careful about letting people in. Their first conversation was unremarkable on the surface. It was a casual exchange about a project they were both working on. He asked Sarah about her background, something she had grown used to explaining to colleagues. But there was something different in his tone, a genuine interest that made her feel heard. It was refreshing, almost comforting. As they talked, Sarah found herself talking more than she usually did, sharing small pieces of her life that she hadn't shared with anyone else in the office. Michael listened intently, nodding occasionally, offering quiet encouragement without pushing. From that moment, a bond began to form between them. It wasn't something either of them expected, but they found themselves drawn to each other. Over the next few weeks, their interactions became more frequent. They began to share coffee breaks, exchanging stories about their lives outside of work. Michael, who had always kept a tight circle of friends, started opening up about his past. He spoke of his childhood, growing up in a small town with a father who was distant and a mother who passed away when he was young. Sarah listened, and for the first time in a long while, Michael felt understood. For Sarah, these conversations were a welcome relief from the isolation she felt in the city. She found herself looking forward to their chats, feeling a connection with someone who seemed to understand the subtle anxieties she carried within. The more they spoke, the more she realized how much they had in common, though their experiences were different. She didn't feel judged in his presence. Instead, she felt like someone who mattered, someone whose thoughts were worth listening to. But even as they grew closer, both Sarah and Michael held back. Neither of them openly acknowledged the growing bond between them, unsure of how to define it. They didn't rush to label what was happening, and perhaps that was the unspoken comfort of it all. They could just be two people, sharing moments without expectation. In their quiet friendship, they found solace, a connection that, while still undefined, felt like the beginning of something important. Chapter 2. The First Spark. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah and Michael's friendship blossomed into something deeper, though neither of them was ready to admit it. It all started innocently: long conversations during lunch breaks, shared laughter in the office, and quiet moments in the hallways where their eyes met with a certain understanding. What began as a casual camaraderie slowly became more significant, and they found themselves drawn to each other in ways that were hard to ignore. One evening, Sarah found herself sitting in the break room after hours, working on a presentation. She had stayed late to finish up some tasks, and as the office emptied, she thought she would have some peace and quiet to get things done. That was when Michael walked in, looking as though he had just finished a meeting with a client. Their eyes met, and for a moment, there was an unspoken recognition between them. It wasn't the first time their eyes had met like that, but tonight it felt different. Michael smiled, a warm, inviting smile that sent a small shiver through Sarah's chest. She tried to focus on her work, but her thoughts kept wandering back to him. Michael, sensing the same electric pull, made his way over to her desk. He asked if she was staying late for a project, and they began talking about the challenges of their work and the goals they had set for themselves. Their conversation was easy, comfortable, and natural, but there was something else hanging between them, something unspoken but undeniable. As they spoke, they started to share personal details about their lives. Michael spoke about his difficult childhood, the struggles of growing up in a family that didn't understand him, and how he had to carve out his own path in life. Sarah, in turn, revealed her fears about the future, her worries about her career, and the recent loss of her mother, a loss that had left a void in her heart she wasn't sure how to fill. The honesty of their conversation created a bond between them that neither had expected. They had always been friendly, but now they were starting to see each other not just as colleagues, but as two individuals who had experienced pain, loss, and the desire to move forward in life. They realized that they understood each other in a way few others could, and that shared connection was the spark that lit something deeper between them. As they continued talking, Sarah noticed how Michael's presence seemed to calm her. His voice, steady and reassuring, made her feel like she could talk about anything, even the most difficult subjects. And Michael, for his part, felt the pull of her warmth and kindness. Her vulnerability touched him, reminding him of the people he had lost, but also of the people he had come to cherish. There was something in Sarah that made him feel safe, a sense of comfort he had never realized he needed. But even with this new closeness, neither of them dared to acknowledge the shift in their feelings. The tension between them was subtle, but it was there, lingering in the air, thickening the space between words. Neither Sarah nor Michael could admit what was happening, and so they continued to share these moments, unaware that they were slowly crossing a line they would never be able to uncross. That night, as they finally said their goodbyes and Sarah walked out of the office, she felt a flutter in her chest, a feeling that lingered long after she had gone home. Michael, too, felt the stir of something new within him. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something stronger than mere friendship. It was the beginning of something that would change them both forever, a spark that, if left unchecked, could ignite into something more powerful than either of them was ready to confront. And so they both went to bed that night with a quiet understanding that their connection had evolved, though neither knew exactly where it would lead. Chapter 3. Moments of Silence. In this chapter, The quiet bond between Sarah and Michael deepens, and the unspoken connection they share begins to weigh heavily on both of them. One warm afternoon, they decide to spend some time together in a park near their office, a place Sarah has grown to love for its calm and serenity amidst the hustle and bustle of city life. The park, with its green grass, towering trees, and soft breeze, feels like a safe space for them, a place where they can exist without the pressure of their everyday lives. Sarah and Michael sit on a bench, both quietly watching the world around them. Children play on the swings in the distance, and couples walk hand in hand, lost in their own conversations. The sounds of life are all around them, but within their little bubble on the bench, there's an almost palpable silence. Neither feels the need to fill the space with words. The silence, however, is not awkward or uncomfortable. It is the kind of silence that two people can share when they are deeply attuned to each other's presence, when the absence of conversation only strengthens the connection between them. As the minutes tick by, Sarah reflects on the depth of the friendship she and Michael have built. They've shared laughter, stories, and moments of vulnerability. But now, sitting next to him, she feels something different, something she can't quite name, but knows is there. It's a quiet recognition that they mean more to each other than they've allowed themselves to admit. It's a realization that they are both holding back, afraid to take the next step. For Sarah, this silence is both comforting and unsettling. On one hand, she enjoys the peace that comes with being in Michael's company without the need to say anything. There's an unspoken understanding between them, an invisible thread that connects their hearts. But on the other hand, the silence is filled with the things they aren't saying to each other, the emotions neither of them is ready to confront. Sarah feels the weight of her growing feelings for Michael, and although she longs to express them, she's paralyzed by fear. What if this closeness fades once the words are spoken? What if saying how she truly feels ruins the beautiful simplicity of their connection? Michael, too, is affected by the silence. He is acutely aware of Sarah's proximity and the way his heart beats a little faster in her presence. He values their friendship, but as the silence stretches between them, he can't ignore the growing ache inside him. He knows that he feels something deeper for her, but he's unsure how to communicate it without risking everything. He fears that saying the wrong thing might cause her to pull away, and the last thing he wants is to lose the only connection that feels real to him. In this moment, both Sarah and Michael are aware of the fragile line they are walking. The silence is both a comfort and a barrier. It's an unspoken acknowledgement of their feelings, but also a reminder of the walls they've built around themselves. The longer they sit in this quiet, the more they realize that the things left unsaid are starting to speak louder than any words they could utter. As the sun begins to set, casting a warm orange glow over the park, Sarah finally breaks the silence with a simple question about something mundane, like a project at work. It's a safe, neutral topic, one that doesn't demand anything from either of them. Michael responds, and the conversation flows easily once again, but the earlier silence lingers in the background of their exchange. Neither of them speaks about the tension they both feel, but in their hearts, they know that something significant is simmering beneath the surface. This moment in the park marks a turning point for Sarah and Michael. They both recognize that their connection has shifted, and the silence, once a comfortable space, has now become a reflection of emotions they are both afraid to confront. The chapter closes with both of them leaving the park with a sense of longing, each carrying the unspoken words between them like an invisible weight, unsure of when or if they will ever be able to say them out loud. Chapter 4. The Decision That Changed Everything. Sarah's life had always been a careful balancing act between her ambitions and her personal connections. Growing up in a small town, she had always dreamed of the big city and the opportunities it promised. Now, at 27, she was standing at the precipice of one of the most defining moments of her life, an offer to work for a prestigious company in a city far away from everything familiar. It was everything she had worked for, a chance to build a career, to prove to herself that she was capable of achieving her dreams. But as the excitement of the opportunity settled in, a strange unease began to take root in Sarah's heart. The excitement was tempered by the weight of something else. Michael. She had grown so close to him, and in the midst of all her career aspirations, she couldn't ignore the deep connection they shared. Their friendship had evolved into something more, though neither had acknowledged it outright. Every time they laughed together, shared a quiet moment, or spoke about their dreams, Sarah felt a sense of belonging with him she had never felt with anyone else. It was during a late evening conversation that the dilemma first surfaced. They were sitting in a cozy cafe, their cups of coffee growing cold as the conversation shifted from work to something more personal. Michael had always been the quiet, introspective type, but that night, there was a vulnerability in his eyes. He had never been someone to wear his heart on his sleeve, but there was something different about the way he looked at her. Sarah could feel the shift in the air, like an unspoken understanding that hung between them, almost tangible. Michael spoke of his own dreams, his aspirations, and the fear he sometimes felt about stepping into the unknown. He mentioned how comfortable he had become in the life he had built, and how the idea of uprooting that stability felt daunting. He talked about his family, his friends, and the life he had in the city. Sarah could hear the unvoiced message in his words. He wasn't ready to leave. But there was something else too, something that lingered in his tone, an unspoken realization that their connection had become something neither of them had fully defined yet. He didn't say it, but Sarah could hear it in his voice. It was as though he was asking her to stay. The weight of Michael's words pressed down on Sarah, and for the first time, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that leaving might mean more than just a career move. It might mean leaving behind something or someone she wasn't ready to part with. The decision that lay before her was more than just about her job. It was about the future and what she truly wanted for herself. Did she pursue her dreams, knowing that they might take her farther away from everything she had known, including Michael? Or did she stay, holding on to a relationship that hadn't yet been fully explored, with the fear of what could happen if she didn't? That night, Sarah lay awake, wrestling with the decision. The city had always been a dream, but now it felt like a distant possibility, clouded by the uncertainty of what might be left behind. She thought about her life with Michael and the connection they had, wondering if that was enough to make her reconsider her move. But the pull of the opportunity before her was strong, and it promised a life she had always imagined. In the end, after days of soul-searching, Sarah made the decision to accept the job. It was a choice that broke her heart, even as it felt like the right step for her future. The conversation with Michael that followed was full of unspoken words. They both knew what was happening, but didn't quite know how to say it. Sarah tried to explain, but the words felt inadequate, unable to capture the mix of excitement and sadness she felt. Michael, too, said little, though his eyes told a different story. The truth was clear. There was no simple way to say goodbye, and they both understood that this decision, though necessary for Sarah's growth, was the end of something else, something they had never fully defined. Chapter 5. The Distance Grows. After Sarah's move to the new city, the gap between her and Michael becomes more pronounced, not just in distance, but in their emotional connection as well. What had once been a steady, comforting friendship begins to shift into something less certain, as the absence of daily interactions leaves a void. The phone calls that used to come easily now feel like a task, a reminder of what they had left behind. The digital messages, which once carried the warmth of shared laughter and familiar thoughts, begin to dwindle in frequency and depth. What had been a bond forged by proximity now starts to fray in the face of physical separation. For Sarah, the transition to her new life isn't as smooth as she had hoped. While she embraces the excitement of her new job and the promise of fresh beginnings, she finds herself constantly distracted by thoughts of Michael. The city she's moved to is vibrant, full of opportunities, but it feels overwhelming at times, especially during quiet moments when she isn't busy working. The new people she meets don't seem to fill the space that Michael once occupied. She tries to make new connections, to build a life, but she can't shake the feeling that something is missing. In every conversation with new friends, she subconsciously compares them to Michael, feeling that their ease and understanding of her are absent. She feels an undercurrent of loneliness, despite the bustling world around her. Michael, on the other hand, struggles with his own emotions. He's happy for Sarah, genuinely proud of her for pursuing her dreams, but there's an ache that he can't shake. He tells himself that this distance was inevitable, that they couldn't have stayed in the same place forever. Yet he can't help but wonder if things could have turned out differently if only they had made a decision together. Deep down, he knows he was never fully open with Sarah about his feelings, and now, with the miles between them, it feels like an unbridgeable gap. He spends his days moving through his routine, but his thoughts often drift back to the times they spent together, the moments they shared that he now realizes were more than just fleeting experiences. He wonders if Sarah feels the same, or if she has simply moved on. The emotional distance that grows between them is just as palpable as the physical one. Sarah's mind, which once automatically turned to Michael when something significant happened, begins to shift its focus elsewhere. She no longer feels the immediate need to share every detail of her life with him. Her messages to him become shorter, more impersonal. She starts to convince herself that maybe this is how things are supposed to be. After all, she's made a choice to move forward with her life. But deep inside, there's an unresolved longing for the connection she had with him. It's not that she regrets her decision, but there's a part of her that wonders what could have been. Meanwhile, Michael, too, retreats emotionally. He doesn't want to burden Sarah with his unspoken feelings, so he pulls back, telling himself it's for the best. He doesn't want to be the one to drag her back into the past, especially when she seems so focused on her new life. But the silence between them weighs on him. It's not that he doesn't care anymore, it's that he's unsure of how to navigate this new reality where Sarah is no longer just a phone call away. The distance, both emotional and physical, grows steadily, and the lingering thought that something was left unfinished nags at both of them. But neither Sarah nor Michael knows how to bridge this widening gap. Both are stuck in their own worlds, haunted by the unspoken truth that they no longer share the same space in each other's lives. It's not that they don't want to try, it's that they don't know how. The more time that passes, the more difficult it becomes to reach out without feeling as if too much has changed. They both grapple with the knowledge that their connection, though meaningful, may be slipping away not because they no longer care, but because the silence between them is growing too loud to ignore. The memories of their time together remain vivid, but with each passing day, the distance between them seems harder to close. The emotional pull they once shared is slowly being replaced by the harsh reality that sometimes, no matter how strong a bond, time and distance can alter everything. Chapter 6. The Encounter. Months had passed since Sarah's move to the new city, and time had a way of making the distance between her and Michael seem both vast and insignificant. Their once constant communication had dwindled to sporadic messages, each one feeling more like an obligation than a true connection. Both had become engrossed in their new lives, Sarah in her career, her new circle of friends, and the life she was building without Michael. Michael and his routines, and the steady rhythm of life that continued without her presence. But despite the passing time, neither could fully shake the feeling that something important had been left behind when Sarah left. It was during a short visit Sarah made back to her old city that fate decided to intervene. She had come back for a conference, an event that was important for her career, and was meant to be a brief trip a few days in and out. There were no plans to reconnect with anyone from her past, least of all Michael. But as she was walking down the busy streets, lost in thoughts about her work, she heard a familiar voice. The voice wasn't loud or forceful. It was calm, almost hesitant, as if unsure whether or not to interrupt her thoughts. "Sarah." She turned, and there he was, Michael, standing just a few feet away, his expression a mix of surprise and something deeper that she couldn't quite read. For a split second, it felt like time had stopped, like the years of silence between them had never existed. Everything around them blurred into the background, leaving only the two of them standing there in the middle of the bustling city. For a moment, Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected to see him here, not in this place, not in this way. "Michael," she said, her voice sounding almost foreign to her. It was as though she hadn't said his name in a long time, and now it felt like it carried the weight of so much more than just a greeting. They stood there for a few awkward seconds, neither knowing what to say next. The small talk that followed felt forced. "How have you been? How's work?" The usual pleasantries that people fall back on when they don't know how to navigate the deeper emotions that are bubbling just beneath the surface. But even as they spoke, there was an undeniable tension between them, an unspoken acknowledgement that something had changed in both their lives since they last saw each other. After a few minutes of small talk, Michael asked, "Do you have time to grab a coffee?" His voice was tentative, almost unsure, as if he was asking for permission to step back into her life, even if only for a fleeting moment. Sarah hesitated, the weight of their past hanging between them. She had come here to work, not to revisit old memories, but there was something about Michael that had always made her feel like home. With a quiet nod, she agreed, and they walked to a nearby cafe. The conversation flowed more easily once they sat down, and the initial awkwardness slowly dissolved. They talked about their lives, what had changed, what hadn't, and the little things that had shaped their days since they last saw each other. It felt strangely natural, as though they had never been apart. But beneath the surface, there was an awareness that things would never be the same. Their connection was still there, undeniable, but the distance between them, both physical and emotional, had left its mark. As they spoke, Sarah couldn't help but notice how different he seemed. The same warm smile, the same intensity in his eyes, but there was a quiet sadness that lingered behind his words. He spoke of his life, his job, and the relationships he had formed, but there was a sense of longing, a hint that something was missing. For Sarah, it was the same. She had tried to move on, to immerse herself in her new life, but the memories of Michael, of the bond they once shared, still lingered. She had never quite allowed herself to let go of him, and in this moment, sitting across from him in a small cafe, she realized how much she had missed him. But she also understood that the person sitting across from her was no longer the same person she had known. He had changed, as she had, and yet, in some inexplicable way, they still understood each other. As the conversation came to a close, Sarah felt an overwhelming sense of bittersweetness. The encounter had been everything she needed and everything she feared. It was a reminder of what they had lost, but also of what they would never be able to reclaim. There would be no going back to the way things were. Their paths had diverged, and the lives they had built apart from one another had become too different to simply pick up where they left off. They said their goodbyes with a hug, and as Sarah walked away, she couldn't help but feel a strange sense of closure. There was no need for grand declarations, no need to say all the things they had left unsaid. The encounter, brief as it was, had spoken volumes. It had been a reminder that some connections are meant to remain in the past, that sometimes the most important things are the ones left unsaid. Chapter 7. The What-Ifs. The chapter opens with Sarah and Michael standing on the same street corner where they first met years ago. Their brief reunion after so much time apart feels surreal, like a dream they've both been too afraid to wake from. They've both changed in ways they hadn't anticipated, and yet the connection between them still feels undeniable, like an echo from the past. As they talk, the conversation drifts toward the paths their lives have taken since they last saw each other. There's a certain tenderness in their words, as if they're both trying to piece together the fragments of what might have been. They find themselves speaking in half-truths, carefully navigating the delicate territory of unspoken emotions. Michael talks about his life in the years since Sarah left, sharing surface-level details of his career and relationships. But there's a hesitation in his voice, a guardedness that wasn't there before. Sarah notices it, but she doesn't press him. She, too, has her own story to tell, but she isn't sure how much of it she's willing to reveal. Instead, they both settle into an easy, if not slightly awkward, rhythm. Two people who have lived separate lives but are still connected by a shared history. As the conversation unfolds, the subject shifts to their past. Michael asks her the question that's been on his mind since the day she left. What if you had stayed? What if we had tried to make it work? Sarah's heart skips a beat. She's been waiting for this moment, knowing it would come, but she doesn't know how to answer. Her mind flashes back to the day she left, when the decision to move away felt like the only logical step. She had told herself it was about career opportunities, about finding herself, about building a life that was all her own. But deep down, she had always known that leaving Michael was also about avoiding the very thing she couldn't confront, the possibility of loving someone and losing them. In that moment, Sarah realizes that the what-ifs are a tangled web of regrets and possibilities that will never have a clear answer. What if she had stayed? What if she had confessed her feelings for him before it was too late? What if Michael had been more open about his own feelings? These questions hang in the air unanswered, but they both know the reality. Their lives, their choices, had already set them on different paths. There was no turning back. Michael, too, is haunted by his own version of the what-ifs. He wonders if things would have turned out differently if he had been braver, if he had told Sarah how much he cared before she made the decision to leave. He recalls the moments they shared, moments filled with unsaid words and missed opportunities. He had always known there was something more between them, but fear and uncertainty had kept him from acknowledging it. Now he wonders if he had only taken a chance, if things might have been different. They sit together in the quiet, each lost in their own thoughts, reflecting on the past that shaped them. The what-ifs swirl around them, a silent reminder of all the paths they never took. But despite the lingering sense of regret, there's also a quiet understanding between them. They both realize that these unanswered questions don't necessarily need to be resolved. Some things are simply not meant to be, and that's okay. The what-ifs will always be there, but they no longer hold the same weight they once did. They've both moved on in their own ways, and the truth of their connection is no longer bound by the things they didn't say or do. In this chapter, the power of the what-ifs is explored not as a source of torment, but as a recognition of the inevitability of their decisions. It's about acknowledging that some moments in life are beyond our control, and the choices we make, no matter how difficult, shape us into who we are meant to become. And while the past may still linger, Sarah and Michael are beginning to understand that it's not the unanswered questions that define their relationship, but the moments they shared, those fleeting, quiet moments that, in the end, were enough. Chapter 8. The Years Between. The years after Sarah's move to the new city marked a significant shift in both her and Michael's lives. Though they had been incredibly close once, time and distance had a way of gradually eroding the connection they once shared. It wasn't that they stopped thinking about each other. It was simply that life had a way of pulling them in different directions. As Sarah settled into her new job and began building a life in the city, the excitement of new opportunities and the distractions of a different pace of life made it easier to put Michael in the back of her mind, even though she never fully forgot him. Sarah quickly adapted to her new surroundings. The city was bustling, full of energy and possibilities. She made new friends, got to know her colleagues better, and began to establish a routine that was far removed from her past. But in the quiet moments, when she was alone in her apartment or taking a walk, Michael's face would often drift into her thoughts. It was always the little things that trigger these memories: an old song playing on the radio, a smell from the bakery down the street, or a conversation that echoed an old joke they had shared. But life had to move on. Sarah met someone new, Tom, a man who seemed to be a perfect fit for her new life. They started dating, and soon enough, their relationship deepened. Tom was kind, understanding, and supportive, qualities Sarah had longed for after the pain of her past losses. Eventually, their relationship grew into something serious, and Sarah, feeling the pull of a future with him, agreed to marry. Still, even as she built a family with Tom, there was an unspoken emptiness within Sarah. It wasn't that she regretted her decision to leave. She loved her new life, her new family, and everything that came with it. But there was a part of her that wondered about the life she might have had with Michael. Those what-if thoughts never fully left her. They lingered in the quiet spaces, even though she rarely acknowledged them out loud. As Sarah started her family, she became focused on her children and creating the life she had always dreamed of, a life of stability and warmth. Yet in moments of solitude, she would find herself thinking of Michael and the bond they once had. That deep connection had been one of the most significant relationships of her life, and while it had faded, it never completely disappeared. On Michael's side, things were equally complicated. Over the years, he found someone else. Her name was Claire, and she was everything Michael needed at the time. She was thoughtful, intelligent, and offered the companionship he had missed for so long. Together, they created a life of their own. They traveled, laughed, and built a shared future. But Michael couldn't escape the ghosts of his past, particularly Sarah. He never spoke about her to Claire, but sometimes, when he was alone or during quiet moments, memories of Sarah would creep in. He often wondered where Sarah was, what she was doing, and if she ever thought of him. But time had also shifted his perspective. He no longer blamed himself for the way things ended between them, nor did he carry the same weight of regret he once had. He had learned to accept the past for what it was: beautiful, painful, and unfinished, but he had also come to realize that some things are simply meant to remain in the past. Both Sarah and Michael had changed. Life had shaped them in ways that neither could have predicted back when they first met. But in the years that had passed, one truth remained. The love they shared, though lost to time, had never truly left them. It simply sat quietly in the background, tucked away in their hearts. Both had built fulfilling lives, but the absence of that one pivotal relationship always lingered, like a faint shadow that followed them no matter how far they ran. The years between them had taught them one important lesson. Love, in its most profound form, isn't always something that can be held on to. Sometimes, it's something that quietly recedes, leaving only traces of what once was. In this chapter, the author highlights how time doesn't necessarily heal all wounds, but rather changes the way people see those wounds. Both Sarah and Michael have found new ways to move forward, but the past still echoes within them, as it often does for people who've had deep, transformative relationships. Their bond may not have survived the years, but it was never truly forgotten. Chapter 9. The Unspoken Truth. As the years pass and time continues to shape their lives, Sarah and Michael's paths cross once again. This reunion is not born from expectation or even desire to reconnect in the way they once imagined. Instead, it is a moment of pure coincidence, the kind that seems almost too perfect, yet carries no hint of unfinished business. They meet in a small cafe on the corner of a busy street, a place neither of them expected to be on that particular day. The encounter is neither dramatic nor filled with the raw emotions of their past. It is, instead, a quiet moment between two people who have lived separate lives for so long, yet whose connection remains undeniably present in the silent spaces between their words. When they first see each other, there's an instant recognition, a flicker in their eyes that says everything without needing to be spoken aloud. The years have changed them both. Sarah's once youthful energy now carries the weight of her responsibilities as a wife and mother. Michael, too, has evolved, though in ways less obvious, his eyes reflecting the kind of quiet wisdom only time can give. They sit down, not as strangers, but not as the close friends they once were either. There is an air of caution, of respect for the time that has passed, and the changes it has wrought in them both. The questions they once had for each other about what might have been, about the path, they didn't take linger in the background, but aren't voiced. They talk about their lives, about the mundane details that fill the gaps of everyday existence. Sarah mentions her children, her husband, and the new house they recently moved into. Michael talks about his job, the travels he's taken, and the quiet peace he's found in his personal life. There is a gentle understanding in their conversation, an unspoken acknowledgement that they have both moved on, that they have both lived lives full of their own stories. But in the undercurrent of their dialogue, there is something else, a shared history that neither of them can completely erase. It is in the way they speak, in the soft pauses between their sentences, in the moments when their eyes meet for just a second too long. Though they do not bring up the past directly, it hangs there, not as an unresolved issue, but as a part of who they are now. Sarah, looking at Michael across the table, understands that she no longer needs the answers she once sought. The questions of what if, and could we have been different, don't seem as important anymore. In fact, they feel distant, like a chapter of her life that, while important, has no place in the story she is living now. Michael, too, senses this. There is no bitterness, no yearning to revisit old wounds. They have both learned that some parts of their past are meant to be left untouched. The truth between them, though unspoken, is clear. They shared something beautiful, something meaningful, but it was never meant to last forever. It was always meant to be a moment, a brief intersection of their lives that, while significant, was not the end of their individual journeys. And that is the unspoken truth between them, that sometimes love isn't about holding on, but about letting go. Sometimes the most powerful moments in life are the ones that don't require closure because they've already been understood in the silence. As they say their goodbyes and leave the cafe, neither feels the need to dwell on what could have been or to lament what was lost. There is a sense of quiet peace between them, a mutual recognition that their time together was a gift, not something to be regretted or mourned. The unsaid goodbye, the one they never had, is somehow perfect in its own way. It was not a dramatic farewell, but a gentle letting go, a quiet acceptance of the lives they've each chosen, with no need for words to make it complete. And in that, they both find a kind of closure, not in the form of a final conversation, but in the deep, unspoken understanding that sometimes the truth doesn't need to be said, it's felt. Chapter 10. Moving on. In final chapter of The Unsaid Goodbye, Sarah finds herself at a point of reflection, looking back on the winding journey her life has taken. The weight of time, with its challenges and joys, has given her the perspective she needed to understand that not all moments, relationships, or connections need to be held onto forever. It's been years since her chance encounter with Michael, and since then, her life has unfolded in ways she couldn't have predicted. Sarah is now married, with children and a home that feels like an accomplishment. Her life, though fulfilling, carries with it an ever-present sense of something missing. It's not a void of regret, but a gentle reminder of a love that never came to full fruition. She's come to realize that the absence of closure with Michael isn't something that should weigh her down. Instead, it's a part of her past, a chapter in her life that, though incomplete, was rich with meaning and significance. Her marriage, while deeply loving and stable, sometimes feels like a life she's settled into, one that lacks the passionate and intense connection she once had with Michael. But she doesn't mourn that passion anymore. Instead, she's learned to appreciate the love she has now for what it offers: stability, comfort, and companionship. She no longer looks back with a sense of longing for something that was left behind. The raw intensity she once shared with Michael has given way to a quieter, more peaceful love. And in this shift, Sarah understands something essential: love evolves, and so do the people who experience it. For Michael, the years have also been filled with growth. He, too, has moved forward, building a life that includes a wife and children. Like Sarah, he sometimes reflects on the past, wondering about the path not taken, the feelings left unspoken, and the unfulfilled potential of what could have been. But in his quiet moments, he knows that his time with Sarah, however brief and unfinished, shaped him in profound ways. It made him more attuned to what true connection feels like, and he is grateful for that. Even as he moves through life, Michael recognizes that not every relationship needs to be permanent to leave a lasting imprint on the soul. One day, Sarah is alone with her thoughts, and the weight of it all hits her at once. She stands at her kitchen window, looking out at the life she's built, and it becomes clear to her that moving on doesn't mean forgetting. It means accepting. She thinks of Michael and the years that have passed, the paths they each took, and the ways in which they've changed. But she also realizes that, while the goodbye between them was never said, it didn't need to be. They had lived their separate lives, but the essence of their connection still lingers in her heart, quiet but steady. It wasn't a goodbye at all, it was an acknowledgement that sometimes you can love someone without needing to hold on to them. As Sarah moves forward, she sees that the most meaningful moments in life aren't always the ones that last the longest. Some connections are fleeting, and some goodbyes are never spoken aloud. In letting go, Sarah has learned that she can carry Michael with her not as a lingering ache, but as a piece of her past that helped shape the person she's become. She doesn't need to dwell on what could have been, because what was enough. The memory of their bond is a quiet comfort, not a burden. Michael, too, finds peace. He has made his peace with the past, understanding that sometimes moving on is the only way to truly honor the love you once had. And so, both Sarah and Michael, despite the unsaid goodbye, continue their journeys, carrying the past with them, but no longer allowing it to define them. The final realization for both is that sometimes the act of moving on is the truest form of love they can offer themselves and the people around them. The unsaid goodbye is a reflection on the power of unspoken words and the quiet moments that define our relationships. It's a reminder that some goodbyes are meant to be said, but they are always felt. If you like this audiobook, then please like, share, and subscribe, and listen other audiobook as well. Thanks for watching.